Hello, my name is Luke. Tonight I will be sharing with you my thoughts on an analysis of James Sinclair Ross's The Lamp at Noon. So first I'd like to begin with a bit of information about the author. So James Sinclair Ross was born on January 22nd, 1908, on a homestead near Shelbrooke, Saskatchewan. He was raised by his mother after his parents separated when he was 7 years old. Ross was, and still is, one of Canada's most respected writers, in particular for his acclaimed novel As For Me and My House. His stories, with their well-crafted structures and precise images, have brought many readers to appreciate Ross's work. In them, he represented a theme that remains preoccupation, intellectual isolation. That information was from the Canadian Encyclopedia. His novels and short stories represent nature as a force beyond human control, one that reduces people to their most elemental selves as they struggle to survive. Lines of communication, most notably between husband and wife, break down as men and women that are left isolated before nature's onslaught. Civilization is but a thin facade built upon social niceties that are easily swept away by the prairie winds. In addition, Ross's works are often set during the Great Depression, so that the economic environment is as unforgiving as the natural one. That information was from the encyclopedia.com. Ross's story is set on a small farm on the Canadian prairie, in a dust storm so thick that the sun cannot reach the land even though it is daytime. 5 years of drought has left the ground to dust, so that the prairie winds have blown all hope from the land. The story is set during the time of the Great Depression. The theme of Sinclair Ross's The Lamp at Noon revolves around the psychological and emotional struggles of early settlers living on the Canadian prairie during the Great Depression. The story explores the futility of human efforts against the backdrop of environmental devastation, particularly the Dust Bowl. Now a bit about the characters. One of the story's two protagonists, Ellen, is Paul's wife and the mother of their child. Economic depression and the harsh environment has left her feeling caged and hopeless, even though their homestead lies on the expansive prairie. Ellen fears there is no future for her family amongst the desolate prairie. She longs to move to town, where her father owns a store at which Paul may find a steady income. The second of the story's two protagonists, Paul, is a farmer and Ellen's husband. Though he is only aged 30, he has been stripped of his youth by the hardship of farming the dusty and infertile land. Stern and stubborn, Paul fails to see the bleak future that his wife fears. He is too proud to give up his dream of a prosperous farm. Now, a bit of information about the plot. Written from a third-person, omniscient perspective that shifts between the points of view of Paul and Ellen. The Lamp at Noon begins with Ellen's inside the house. Ellen lights a lamp just before noon because 3 days of high winds have kicked up so much dust that the sunlight can't penetrate the air to reach their window. While waiting for her husband to come in for lunch, she stands transfixed at the window and worries about her baby, who won't stop crying. She would like to hold and console her baby, but she leaves him in his crib, where a fine cloth muslin tent protects him from breathing in the dust that infiltrates the house. When Paul enters, the couple can barely talk to each other. They had argued that morning and the day before. Soon Ellen reignites the argument and insists that they leave the farm to live in town. Paul refuses to leave and insists that while there are dust storms now, the dry years will end. They have a short standoff about who has the bigger hardships, and Paul feels ashamed. He tries to go outside, but Ellen pleads with him to stay. She says she worries when left alone, and that she feels caged and imagines running away. But Paul dismisses her pleas and goes out to his horses. The narrative point of view then follows Paul out to the stable. In the calm and peaceful stable, he contemplates his vision of a brighter future. When he feels the ribs of his malnourished horse, though, he realizes Ellen might have been right, and that he can't even keep his animals fed, let alone his family. He understands that she has no faith in the future he envisions. The wind moving past the stable suddenly sounds like a woman's cry, and Paul suddenly panics. He rushes to the house. But after seeing that Ellen is walking back and forth with the baby in her arms, he relaxes. He goes to his tool shed and reconsiders his plans for the farm. He decides to wait until the dust storm has died down to tell Ellen about his plans. However, Ellen and the baby are gone when he returns to the house. Frantic, Paul searches the house and runs through the fields looking for them. After 2 full hours of searching, Paul finds her lying down on the sand and clutching the baby. The baby is cold, but Ellen does not acknowledge that he is dead. Speechless, Paul carries his wife and child back toward the farm. The story ends with Ellen telling Paul that he was right. The storm did die down, and a red sky means there's fair weather ahead. Sinclair uses simile quite often when describing the harsh surroundings. Some examples I found are, when talking about the homestead walls as affected by the wind. They creaked and sawed as if the fingers of a giant hand were tightening to collapse them. The fields, beaten and mounded smooth with dust, as if a sea in gentle swell had turned to stone. Darkness. The darkness round him now was as a slate on which her lonely terror limned itself. Wind. Distraught like a bird that has felt the graze of talons on its wing. Sunlight. The sun raced like a wizened orange, and the sunset smoldered like a distant fire. Sinclair also uses personification quite often to describe the wind. Here are some examples. This scream of wind was a cry from her parched and frantic lips. The cry of a woman with eyes like those that watched him through the dark, eyes that were mad. The light from the lamp reaching out through the open door. And my favorite one, the dusk was drawn apart in breathless waiting, a finger on its lips. Ross uses a lot of imagery, which really makes me feel as the reader as if I am right there experiencing it all in person. Here are a couple examples. The dust was thickening to an impenetrable fog. In this example of visual imagery, Sinclair Ross illustrates how the soil that the wind kicks up obscures Ellen's vision to the point where the sun is blocked out, and she can no longer see beyond their property. This contributes to Ellen's claustrophobia and the sense that she's caged in the house. There were 2 winds, the wind in flight and the wind that pursued. The one sought refuge in the eaves, whimpering in fear. The other assailed it there. In this example of auditory imagery, Ross represents the particular quality of the constant winds passing around the house by personifying the winds as being in a chase. The first wind is more subdued in the frightened whimpering sound it produces. The second is loud and violent, able to chase the whimpering wind out of the eaves. Now a bit about my own thoughts. I quite enjoyed reading this short story, and while reading I was reminded of a windstorm that my neighborhood saw a couple years ago. It was sometime this summer, perhaps August or early September. My brothers had had a lemonade stand earlier that day, and so the easel that they had used for a sign was still sitting at the end of our driveway. I remember I was in my living room when the storm hit. I recall looking out our window and hearing a loud boom of thunder. I saw our easel get picked up by a strong gust of wind and get whisked down the street. Just like in Sinclair's story, the sun became blocked out by the thick clouds, which remained for a few hours. The power ended up going out in our house, and I remember it was so dark that we had to use candlelight and flashlights to see. It was only around 6 or 7 o'clock at night as well. I found Sinclair's story very rich and engaging as the reader, especially with his ample use of personification to describe the winds, as well as his vivid imagery. The story really sheds light on how one's mood is easily affected by their surroundings, especially bad weather. That concludes my presentation. Hopefully it wasn't too long, and hopefully I blew you away.